Hi, I'm Kelsey. At my sister's wedding, they sat me in the backyard next to the catering tent, under a tilted umbrella, like I was someone who wandered in off the street. No speech, no seat at the table, not even my name in the program. They used my company's software to run the event. They used my design for the venue. They even stole the painting I commissioned and signed someone else's name. And when I said something, my mother texted me not to ruin the day. So I didn't. I handed my sister a red envelope instead, then walked away. But how did it get that bad? And why was I still holding on for so long? I remember the exact moment we pulled up to the Bradford estate house. My fingers fidgeted with the silver clasp on my clutch as the valet opened my door. Charleston's late spring air was thick with the scent of wisteria and money. The estate sprawled in every direction, an orchestrated testament to someone else's idea of perfection. Seraphine's idea. Of course. I stepped out in a navy sheath dress clean, classic, understated. I'd chosen it carefully. Not too flashy, but sharp enough to say, I belong here even if they pretend otherwise. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks beside me and offered a half smile. You okay? I will be, I said, scanning the sea of pastel. Everyone looked like they'd been pulled from the pages of a Southern wedding catalog. Champagne dresses, floral prints, pearl earrings. I looked like a corporate outsider who wandered into a debutante ball. Inside, the reception tent gleamed. Chandeliers strung from ceiling beams sparkled above crisp white linens and gold-accented place cards. I felt the flutter in my chest, the foolish hope that maybe this time they'd see me as more than a placeholder in family photos. Lorraine appeared in a cloud of rose perfume and pearls. There you are, she exclaimed. And Marcus, so good to see you, dear. Her eyes flicked over me. Navy? Huh. I didn't respond. I'd learned long ago that defending my choices was pointless. Where should we check in? Oh, just over there by the entry table. The planner has everything. I need to find Seraphine last-minute adjustments, you know? Of course. Always something. We approached the check-in. A young woman with an iPad smiled at Marcus, then turned to me. Name, please? Kelsey Krantz. And Marcus Eden. She typed, smiled, frowned, scrolled. I don't see. Oh, wait. One moment. She stepped aside and returned with a printed list. There it was. Marcus Eden +1. My name handwritten next to his in black ballpoint pen. No calligraphy, no embossing, no title. The planner offered an apologetic shrug. We had some updates last minute. You're all set now. I nodded, but something inside me settled the way cold water does in your stomach. Unexpected, unwanted, and heavy. A younger assistant appeared, chirpy and bright. Right this way. We followed her past the main tent, through the manicured garden walk, and down a cobblestone path that curved behind the estate. Almost there, she sang. We rounded the final bend and stopped. Two white plastic chairs sat under a crooked umbrella near the catering prep tent. No flowers, no centerpiece, just the back end of the property, where delivery trucks must have pulled in hours ago. A folding table covered in a generic cloth held two place cards handwritten. Marcus stared. You've got to be kidding. The assistant beamed. There were a few last-minute adjustments. Enjoy. I stood still, the air thickening around me. One of the catering staff passed by and nodded politely, mistaking me for another vendor. I didn't sit. I couldn't. The last time I felt like this, I was 16, standing alone in a high school parking lot with a birthday cake I'd bought for myself because Seraphine had a solo dance recital and no one remembered. I'd graduated top of my class at MIT, started Nexus Technologies from my couch, scaled it to a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and yet here I was. Again. Forgotten. Moved off the map. We stood there in silence for what felt like a full minute. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. Do you want to leave? I opened my mouth, then closed it. Leaving would be easier, cleaner. But that's what they counted on. That's what they'd always counted on. If I walk out now, I said slowly. They win. Again. He didn't argue, just gently pulled out the plastic chair for me. I sat. The umbrella above us tilted just enough to let the sun stab into my left eye. My name tag fluttered in the breeze like a mistake no one had bothered to fix. I looked out across the lawn, where laughter echoed from the main tent and servers topped off flutes of chilled champagne. They hadn't seen the worst yet. We made our way back toward the reception tent, the low hum of classical strings spilling out and folding around the night air like a practiced smile. Marcus stayed just a step behind me, hand resting at the small of my back, not possessive, but grounding. I needed that anchor. The short walk from the plastic chairs in the backyard to the party everyone else was actually invited to felt longer than any elevator pitch I'd ever made in a boardroom. The lighting had shifted. Candles were lit now, and small lanterns dangled from above like props from a wedding magazine. Everyone glowed in soft pastel screams, peaches, dusty rose. It was almost cinematic. Until I walked in. I hadn't noticed earlier, too distracted by the seating fiasco, maybe, but my navy dress stood out like ink on lace. Not one person wore anything remotely close to a dark shade. A woman near the entrance, a former neighbor I hadn't seen in years, let her eyes sweep over me and smiled. Champagne and blush were on the invite. Weren't they? She asked. Half whisper, half polite critique. I returned her smile with practiced ease. I must have gotten the abridged version. When she turned away, I checked my phone. I still had the digital version of the invite saved. No mention of a dress code. Nothing in the tiny scripted text about themes or tones or family unity in matching hues. Just a time, a place, and a name. Seraphine. In gold foil. We wandered deeper into the crowd. Marcus handed me a glass of sparkling water. He was trying. He always did when the air grew cold around me, in rooms meant to be warm. But nothing prepared me for what came next. A young man approached, early 20s, suit too big at the shoulders, lanyard tucked behind his tie. I recognized him immediately. Kyle, former intern at Nexus 2 summers ago, smart, eager, asked too many questions but learned fast. Hey, sorry to bother, are you with the vendor crew? He asked, gesturing to a power strip near the speaker line. We need help hooking the backup lights. They're kicking the amps out again. I stared at him for a full 2 seconds. He blinked, confused. Then his eyes widened. Oh my God. You're Kelsey, right? I'm so sorry I didn't. Marcus chuckled softly, diffusing the awkward tension like he was born for it. Easy mistake, he said. It's been that kind of night. Kyle flushed bright red, mumbled something about checking the cables himself, and disappeared into the blur of florals and fairy lights. I didn't say anything. Because what could I say? You get mistaken for someone who sets the table, not someone who built it. That sticks. We took 2 glasses of wine from a passing tray and moved to a quieter corner of the tent, just outside the range of the band's volume. I stood in silence for a moment, letting the music swell around me, instrumental renditions of love songs everyone pretended they hadn't heard 100 times before. I watched my mother laughing at a table near the front. Her posture told me everything. Seraphine sat beside her, radiant in her curated perfection. No shadows on her. Not tonight. And I thought, when people forget you long enough, you stop reminding them. They had erased me in real time. With every click of a slideshow, every table chart, every dress code, they were redrawing the family narrative without me. And it wasn't even malicious anymore. It was simply normalized. I remembered the gala last year, the one where my company sponsored half the venue. My name left off the thank you banner, or the family group text I wasn't included in for Seraphine's engagement party. The jokes I had to hear secondhand. Eventually, you begin to shrink yourself before they even ask. I hadn't said a word, but Marcus must have read something in my face. He leaned in slightly. Why are you still here? It wasn't a challenge. It was gentle, curious. I sipped the wine before answering. Because I'm not going to be erased quietly, I said. Not again. He didn't nod, didn't smile, just looked at me, the way you do when someone finally says the thing they've been circling for years. And for the first time that evening, I didn't feel small. We didn't rush. After that conversation with Marcus, I needed a minute to breathe before whatever came next. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a golden filter over the estate lawn. Someone rang a small brass bell near the bar and announced that the family slideshow was about to begin. Guests migrated toward the tent with the kind of cheer reserved for nostalgia and free cocktails. I didn't follow right away. I stood off to the side, watching the slow flow of linen and pastel drift into the space that had quietly decided I didn't belong. Marcus touched my elbow. "You good?" he asked, low and close. "I'm fine," I said. A lie, but not one that needed correcting just yet. We entered last. I didn't want to sit again, not after the backyard. So we stayed standing near the back, next to a hydrangea centerpiece too tall for anyone to see around. A projector hummed to life. The music kicked in, one of those emotional piano covers of a pop song from 20 years ago, and the first image lit up the screen. Seraphine, of course. At 5 years old, playing dress-up in our mother's wedding gown. Next came her at summer camp, then winning a high school pageant, then a series of carefully selected college moments, sorority mixers, charity events, a graduation shot where she was front and center, smiling like the world had been made for her. I waited, and waited. Then finally, I appeared. Barely. A grainy photo of Seraphine blowing out candles at her sweet 16. I was in the corner of the frame, blurry, caught mid-blink, holding a gift bag. No name, no mention. Nothing but a shadow in someone else's moment. A woman behind me leaned toward her friend and whispered, "Is she a cousin? I don't think I've seen her before." Marcus turned to look at me, eyes searching mine, but I didn't meet them. I just kept watching. Then it hit me like a slap. The dress. The gown Seraphine was wearing in the highlight reel, the one shown during her bridal boutique visit, montage was mine. Not literally, but in form, in line, in every curve and stitch. I'd drawn it. Years ago. One rainy Tuesday night in a tiny Boston apartment, sketching out a dream I hadn't even known was mine until that pencil touched paper. I'd shown it to her. That same year, after my first failed pitch to investors. I remember sitting at our mother's dining table, that sketch laid out next to a plate of untouched pasta, telling her how maybe just maybe turn that sketch into a business one day. She said it was sweet. Then she changed the subject to a spa opening in Atlanta. Now there it was. On her. In silk. Not a single nod to where it came from, not a passing mention in a speech, just borrowed elegance, presented as her own. I should have said something, loudly, publicly, but instead, I felt myself lock into place stone under skin. What stunned me wasn't the theft. It was the precision of the omission, every moment selected, every frame cropped. This wasn't laziness. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a curated history, one where I simply hadn't existed. A safe narrative, free of complications, clean, perfect. And that's when it changed for me. That's when I stopped waiting to be remembered. This wasn't a wound that would bleed. It would calcify, settle into bone, and remind me every time I walked into a room with people who smiled like they didn't know what they'd done. They didn't need to shout me out of the story. They'd already written around me. But I knew how stories worked, and I knew how to write my own. Dinner was beginning. Guests drifted slowly toward the vineyard lawn, guided by lantern light that hung from branches like glowing fruit. A soft orchestral arrangement trickled from hidden speakers, polished and pleasant, the kind of music that's expensive enough to be ignored. The sun had settled low, painting long shadows across the crushed stone paths and bathing everything in that golden, too perfect hue you only see in commercials for luxury skincare or expensive wine. I walked beside Marcus in silence, a deliberate few steps behind the others. We weren't in a rush. Or maybe I was stalling. He chatted lightly about the trellises, the wine selection, even the lighting scheme, his words floating past me like steam I couldn't grasp. I nodded when expected, smiled when necessary. But inside, something shifted. Because what I was seeing wasn't new. Not really. There was the reclaimed wood wine bar, its uneven grain stained just enough to look rustic, but not rough. The central garden fountain, once crumbling, now encircled with climbing vines and delicate string lights. And the layout god. The layout. Tables spaced to mimic symmetry without rigidity, the chairs mismatched in just the right way. I'd seen it all before. I stopped walking. "This place," I said, barely above a whisper. "I think we've been here before. Not here exactly. But this is mine." Marcus followed my gaze. "The Lowndes Grove pitch?" I nodded. "Distressed vineyard property. Nexus funded the prototype. I built this in paper, they built it in real life." He let out a low breath. "This is your design." All around us, people were laughing, sipping Ross, marveling at the sunset glow, as if it had been planned. They had no idea they were standing in someone else's vision, someone not invited to the credits. And then, from across the lawn, a voice rang out like a trigger pulled too soon. To the bride and her vision. There was a scattered clink of glasses, polite applause, and a pause that caught my breath. I turned my head slowly. On a side screen next to the floral arch, a slideshow begging images of the property's transformation. Then a rendering appeared, bold and clean. Restoration site plan proposed by M&S Holdings. My design, my drawing, my font, my vines, my layout, my name, gone. The applause surged again. But all I heard was static, buzzing behind my eyes. I could have walked over right then and ripped the screen cord out of the power strip, said everything, named every detail they stole, but Marcus placed his hand gently over mine. His voice was calm. "Not like this," he said. "They want you to react. Don't hand them the scene." I swallowed hard. Anger tastes different when it's old and well-aged. I turned toward a server passing by and smiled. The kind of smile you wear like armor. "Another sparkling water, please." Later, near the over-designed floral bara bouquet station, so absurdly similar to the one I sketched for my graduate showcase, it made my stomach churn. He found her. Seraphine. She was radiant, laughing with two guests draped in pastel chiffon, her hands gesturing with practiced elegance, as if she'd been trained in campaign optics. Every angle of her was deliberate. When she saw me, she lit up with that careful smile she always wore in public. "Ro! Isn't it all lovely?" she said, voice dipped in honey, hands spread like a hostess in a magazine spread. I tilted my head slightly. "So, how'd you lock down this venue?" She didn't miss a beat. "Oh, we all pitched in. Group effort. You know how these things work." I didn't respond. She added, like a little flourish, "Dad's team pulled some strings too. But it's nice, right?" I let my lips curl just enough. It's familiar. Seraphine blinked, just once, as if recalibrating. Then she turned back to her conversation without another word, her smile never faltering. I walked away, not because I had nothing else to say, but because I finally understood the pointlessness of saying it. At our table, pushed to the edge of the party like a forgotten set piece, I sat down quietly. Around me, the celebration swelled. Toasts, laughter, clinking forks and glasses. The sound of people applauding something that wasn't real. And there she was again, Seraphine, the golden daughter, framed beneath the canopy of lights and vines, posing in a vision that wasn't hers, inside a world I had created and been cut from. I thought of the dress, the slideshow, the venue, the name on the render. This wasn't accidental. This wasn't chaos. This was architecture. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd erased me intentionally. Because I didn't fit the story they wanted to tell. Not as the artist, not as the sister, not even as the guest. They didn't just ignore me. They designed around me. And that's when it shifted. That's when I stopped wanting a seat at the table, stopped craving their acknowledgement, their invitation, their edited version of acceptance. I didn't want back in. I wanted the blueprint and the match. I leaned forward slightly, fingers resting on the linen tablecloth, and whispered under my breath, If they keep doing this, I'll burn it down on my own terms. Marcus glanced over at me. He didn't ask what I meant. He knew. He saw the quiet fire in my eyes and knew something had changed permanently. This time, I wouldn't wait to be erased. I'd sign my name across the ash. Marcus and I found ourselves at the edge of things literally and otherwise. Our table sat close to the vineyard fence, far from the golden glow of the family canopy, where laughter floated like bubbles in champagne. The head table was lit brighter than the rest, a stage beneath strings of light, with Seraphine squarely in the spotlight. As I unfolded the wedding booklet, one of those high-gloss, ribbon-bound keepsakes with cursive quotes about love and family, I already knew what I wouldn't find. I still looked. Pages of thank yous spilled across spreads names of friends, business partners, wedding planners, dog sitters. Everyone, it seemed, but me. I wasn't there. Not as a sponsor, not as a sister, not even as a guest. My thumb paused halfway through the booklet. I reached for my phone, needing the cold comfort of distraction. One unread message blinked at the top of the screen from my mother. "Please don't make a scene. Today is about your sister. Let's not spoil that." No, hi. No. How are you holding up? No mention of my name. It wasn't a plea. It was a command disguised as care. Keep the peace, for the sake of the image. Her image. I stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking it. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Dinner plates clinked around us. Someone made a toast I didn't bother to listen to. I kept my eyes on the candles, watching their flames bend and return, like they had learned how to bow without going out. That's when I saw the painting. It was unveiled beside the couple's sweetheart table, draped in gauzy linen, with a tiny spotlight shining down like it was the crown jewel of the evening. A canvas of a coastal lighthouse, weathered white, red-roofed, waves crashing at its base. My breath caught. I had commissioned that piece 3 months ago, from a local artist who only painted by request. I wanted to gift it for the ceremony as a nod to where Seraphine and I spent our summers Cape Hatteras, when things still felt like family. A different card sat at its base now. In handwriting that wasn't mine. To the bride and groom, a cherished memory, love, the Bradford family. Marcus' eyes met mine. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. I stood up, slowly, wine glass still in hand, and made my way toward the wine bar. The farther I got from the tables, the easier it was to breathe. Seraphine was there alone for once, adjusting her veil and scanning the crowd like she was headlining a show. She turned when she saw me, her smile mechanical and glistening. "You've really outdone yourself," I said. She tilted her head. "It turned out well, didn't it?" "You always did know how to repackage things," I replied. Her tone dropped half an octave. "Oh, come on, Ro. Are we doing this here?" I didn't blink. "Do you want to talk about this now or after the contract is voided?" Her smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes tightened. "God," she sighed, rolling her eyes just enough for me to catch it. "Isn't it exhausting always making yourself the victim?" I smiled. Not wide. Just enough. Not nearly as exhausting as pretending you're the only one who matters. And then I turned. Not in a dramatic spin, not to storm off. Just turned. I walked slowly back toward our table, my heels muted on the stone path. No one noticed. No one ever did until the fire was already lit. I sat, took a breath, and lifted my phone again, not for distraction this time, but direction. I pulled up the Nexus contract file highlighted sections, timelines, sponsorship clauses, licensing agreements. This wouldn't end with an apology. It would end with a ledger. The estate lawn had begun to settle into that strange lull that comes after the main event, when the spotlight dims but the performance quietly continues. Dessert platters floated out of the kitchen like practiced ballerinas, waitstaff weaving through clusters of guests who now lounged in half-drunk bliss. The music had softened into an ambient hum, no longer a centerpiece but a background texture, the kind meant to flatter conversation rather than interrupt it. Laughter at the head table had grown louder, more wine-soaked, more careless. The kind of laughter that comes from people who believe they've already won. I stood still, alone on the garden path, just between the reception tent and the open bar, watching the scene unfold as if through glass. From here, the entire wedding looked choreographed, elegant, picturesque, and painfully hollow. Every detail bore my fingerprints, every logistical miracle pulled from the back end of the system I built. And yet, my name was nowhere to be seen. They had erased me cleanly, efficiently, like a smudge on a mirror. But what they didn't realize, what Seraphine never realized, was that I never built things without leaving myself a key. I pulled out my phone and tapped into the wedding interface. It only took a few seconds to confirm what I'd suspected. Our proprietary coordination software was running the entire event, from scheduling and floor plan mapping to inventory tracking and server rotations. My company's software, Nexus Technologies. And yet, you wouldn't know it. The logo was gone. The footer credits stripped. Even the loading screen had been white-labeled. Clean, deliberate, illegal. I opened the license log, scrolling until my thumb hovered over the contract's two most critical clauses. Section 6.4. Unauthorized deployment of proprietary architecture. Section 8.2. Removal of branding and attribution. A quiet betrayal has a particular weight. It doesn't land like a slap. It sinks like a stone. Heavy, lingering, and it changes how you breathe around people who used to feel like home. I glanced up and caught Marcus' eyes across the lawn. His face shifted slightly, a quiet alertness settling behind his calm expression. He knew the look I wore. We'd prepared for it even if we never wanted it to come to this. Then, further back, I saw him. Howard Clancy, one of our original seed investors. The kind I'd vouched for personally when others hesitated. A man who had shaken my hand, toasted my vision, and promised loyalty in the early days when loyalty still felt like a currency. And now, here he was, laughing beside Seraphine's husband like old college buddies, a tablet glowing softly between them. I could tell from the rhythm of their gestures, this wasn't idle chatter. This was negotiation. I walked over slowly, heels clicking against the slate pavers like a metronome marking time. They didn't notice me until I was practically standing at the edge of the table. Howard's eyes widened slightly. "Kelsey," he said, blinking like I'd appeared out of fog. "Wasn't expecting to see you tonight." "Clearly," I said. My voice was smooth, cool, sharp in the way velvet can hide steel. Without another word, I tapped into my files and sent the document straight to the tablet in front of him. AirDrop accepted. No encryption block. He turned the screen toward himself, his expression tightening as he read. A time-stamped contract. The original proposal for the Nexus Wedding Suite deployment. Signed by me. Explicitly forbidding unauthorized reuse without visible credit. He swallowed hard. No one said anything. Then, in a rare act of good judgment, Howard set the tablet face down on the table and stood. "Excuse me," he muttered, before walking briskly into the darkness. Seraphine's husband stared after him, lips parted as if waiting for a cue that never came. I didn't wait for one either. I turned and walked away. Halfway across the lawn, I heard fast footsteps catching up. I didn't slow. "You really had to do that?" Seraphine's voice behind me, full of venom wrapped in silk. I didn't turn around. "You really had to steal?" She stepped beside me, eyes narrowed. "It was a mistake." "No," I said evenly, meeting her gaze now. "What's coming next, that's the correction." Her mouth parted like she was about to say something vicious, but I was done giving her stages to perform on. I walked away with deliberate steps, the kind that don't ask for space. They take it. At the valet stand, the laughter and light of the reception still flickered behind me, the illusion of celebration continuing as if nothing had ruptured. But something had. And it would never go back. I pulled out my phone once more and opened the draft email to our legal team. No drama, no threats, just a single precise sentence. They violated clauses 6.4 and 8.2. Initiate termination procedures, effective immediately. I hit send. There was no speech, no dramatic toast, no lights dimming, just the quiet, grounding sound of my own boundaries being reestablished. And that was enough. The tent glowed warmer now, flickering in candlelight and floral shadows as people leaned back from their plates, loosening ties, sipping the last of their wine. Dessert was being served, some delicate mousse in a martini glass with edible petals on top, and I stood at the entrance for a moment longer than I needed to. Marcus Hant followed me in this time. He knew better. Some steps you have to take on your own. My heels tapped lightly as I walked between the tables. Conversations lowered to murmurs. Forks slowed. Eyes turned, but didn't linger. I wasn't here for them. The head table stood ahead like a raised stage, each guest there draped in pastel approval. Seraphine sat dead center, her shoulders relaxed, her posture perfect. I didn't break stride. When I reached her, I didn't wait for a pause in the laughter. I simply reached into my clutch, pulled out the red envelope, and placed it gently on the white linen, beside her untouched champagne. She blinked at it once, then twice her hand still holding the stem of her glass. She didn't look up. Inside that envelope was a legal termination of Nexus Technologies' sponsorship, a revocation of all rights to the event planning software they had used without permission, and a clause-enforced cease and desist, and a letter, 12 words. You chose to write me out. I'm returning the pen. I turned without waiting for a response. As I walked back down the aisle between tables, I felt the ripples behind me. Small at first, soft murmurs, glances, a hand touching a shoulder, but then stronger. I saw Howard Clancy stiffen in his seat as he leaned toward Seraphine's husband, whispering something sharp. Her husband frowned, opened the envelope, then leaned in closer, reading again. I didn't slow. At the far end of the tent, Marcus stood waiting near the exit, arms crossed. He nodded slightly as I approached, the corners of his mouth tugging in something close to admiration, but far quieter. Done? He asked. For now? I said. We stood for a beat, long enough to feel the shift in the air. That moment when power tilts, ever so slightly, and everyone knows it, whether they'll admit it or not. I was about to leave when a staffer came up to me, a slim folder in her hands. Ms. Krantz? The family wanted you to have one of the VIP keepsakes. She offered it politely, professionally, unaware of what she was handing me. I took it. Back at our table eyes, the same one at the edge of the lawn, out of the light, opened the folder. Inside was the custom wedding booklet given only to a select few. A legacy collection, Seraphine had once called it in an interview. I flipped through. Pages of family history, generations of Mallorys and Bradfords, side by side in perfect calligraphy. Thank you notes, dedications, founding stories, engagement recaps, childhood photos. I wasn't in a single one. Not a paragraph. Not a name. Not a grainy image in the margin. Near the end, a quote was printed across 2 full pages. Our shared journey begins here. I closed the folder. Not mine. As Marcus signaled the valet and the evening hummed behind us in fading applause and piano chords, I walked ahead toward the drive. A man in a catering jacket held the door for me and said, "Mom!" That was strong. I smiled and stepped inside the car. It was overdue. As Marcus pulled the car around, I stayed just outside the tent, letting the weight of the last 2 hours settle. Guests were moving lazily now, drifting toward the bar, the photo booth, the valet. The volume had dropped, but the tension hadn't. There was still a strange electricity in the air, like something unspoken had started to ripple under the surface, and no one quite knew what to do with it. A wedding coordinator I didn't recognize approached with a smile that was too crisp to be sincere. She handed me a box wrapped in cream linen ribbon. "The family wanted you to have one of the keepsake gifts, Ms. Krantz. It's part of the legacy collection." Legacy. I nodded, took the box without speaking, and stepped off the path toward a quiet corner of the lounge area. A few chairs, now mostly empty, circled a low table where abandoned glasses and half-eaten desserts sat untouched. I opened the box. Inside was a leather-bound book titled The Mallory Bradford Union, a new chapter. The cover was embossed in gold, too ornate to be tasteful. I flipped through slowly. Pages of family stories, engagement photos, genealogy charts. When I reached the family tree section, my eyes scanned instinctively. I found Seraphine. I found my parents. Even distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in 10 years. But my name was gone. My branch ended, severed. I closed the book gently, not because I was afraid of damaging it, but because damage had already been done. Deliberately, silently. "Hey!" a voice said from behind me. I turned. It was a woman around my age, someone I didn't recognize. She looked at me kindly. "You're Marcus +1, right?" I held her gaze for a beat, then smiled. "I built the logistics platform that organized this whole event," I said. "But yes, I am with Marcus too." She blinked, caught off guard, then offered an awkward smile before excusing herself toward the bar. I set the book down on the table. I didn't need it. I didn't need proof of my absence. Not 2 minutes later, Uncle Edric walked over, bourbon in hand, moving a little slower than usual, but with a look that told me he was sharper than ever. He sat beside me without asking and stared straight ahead. "Why weren't you up there?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. "They said it was full," I said, "and I guess so was their version of this family." He exhaled through his nose. "You know I've watched them do this since you were 12, right? That slow erasure. The kind that happens with a smile." I nodded. "You didn't deserve it then," he said, looking me in the eye now. "And you sure as hell don't now." That moment hit harder than anything Seraphine had said or hadn't, because this wasn't validation from the public. This was recognition from blood, from someone who'd been silent too long. "Thanks, Uncle Ed," I said softly. He raised his glass to no one in particular. "Next time they send you a family tree, send it back with pruning notes." We both chuckled, and for a second, I forgot where we were. When Marcus walked up, I stood and looped my arm through his. I left the book where it sat, spine up, ribbon still intact. "That's the last time I ask for a seat at their table," I said. Marcus glanced at me. "Then maybe it's time we build one they can sit at, unless they're invited." My phone buzzed as we stepped onto the crushed gravel path toward the valet stand. An email. Subject line. "Today." Message. "You handled yourself with dignity. We should talk Monday." It was from an investor, one who'd been at the event, one who mattered. I tucked the phone into my clutch, nodded to the valet, and slid into the car beside Marcus. "Let's go home," I said. 3 weeks had passed since the wedding. The storm had officially passed, or so it appeared. But in Charleston, especially in the business circles where social reputation is currency, silence has a weight louder than scandal. I didn't need to speak. I didn't need to clarify, accuse, or defend. The truth had already begun to ripple through the right rooms. 2 prominent sponsors quietly withdrew from Seraphine's media firm. No grand announcements, just the kind of retractions that made headlines without ever being written. Integrity concerns, they cited in terse internal memos. She knew exactly what that meant, and she knew exactly where it came from. But I had said nothing. That was the point. I got a message, indirectly, from Richard Bradford, her father-in-law. It came through his assistant, polite and restrained. "We value what Nexus represents. If there's a way to move forward discreetly, respectfully, we're open." I read it once, then archived it. I never replied. Some bridges aren't worth walking back across. Instead, I returned to my rhythm. Back to the office, back to the city I loved. My workspace overlooked the Cooper River, where the light came in softer in the late afternoons. My desk, minimalist by design, had only one object that stood out: a red envelope. The second copy, the one I had never handed out, never opened. I kept it as a symbol. Restraint doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is the loudest language of power. Then came an unexpected email. From my mother, no subject line, just one line in the body. "We should talk, just us." No apology, no warmth. But still, it was something. A crack in the wall. I stared at the red envelope that night, holding it in my hands without opening it. Not the one from my desk, but the original, sealed, untouched, still carrying the weight of what might have been said. Eventually, I typed back a single word. Okay. She invited me to dinner. No other details. I assumed Seraphine wouldn't be there. I hoped so. Her house hadn't changed. Same ivy climbing the white columns, same creaky screen door that let in too much humidity, the same bowl of lemons on the kitchen table, bright and untouched, like props in a play. She had made roast chicken, her version of a peace offering, stripped of nostalgia. Safe. Neutral. We didn't hug. We didn't linger in the doorway. We just sat. She poured 2 glasses of wine. I declined mine. For a while, we talked around the truth. Weather, traffic, a new bookstore opening downtown, things people say when they don't know where to begin. Eventually, she said, maybe I should have said something sooner, about the wedding, about everything. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence stretch. I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet, she added, still looking at her plate. I finally replied, soft but clear, and that's how people like me disappear. She looked up then, not to argue, not to justify, just to see me. And for the first time in a long time, she actually did. We didn't have a breakthrough. There were no tearful apologies, no dramatic catharsis. But we spoke. In fragments. I mentioned moments I remembered in detail, things that had shaped me, and she blinked at them like they were unfamiliar shadows. She didn't deny them, but she didn't know what to do with them either. Still, she listened. And for once, that was enough. Then she stood up and left the room. When she returned, she had something in her hand. A red envelope, not mine, hers. A second copy she must have opened after the wedding, not the legal documents, but the personal letter I had written. The one explaining everything, not just what I had done, but why. She set it on the table between us. I opened it, she said. Just the letter. I needed to understand. She paused, then added, you didn't just walk away. You walked right. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something close to acknowledgement, a shift. She finally saw that my actions weren't about punishing anyone. They were about reclaiming myself from a history that too many people had tried to edit out. We didn't linger after that. We didn't make plans to meet again. But we didn't close the door either. A week later, I was back at Nexus, sitting with my leadership team around the oval table in our new conference room. We were finalizing the structure for a mentorship initiative, one designed specifically for women in tech, who'd spent years being the support system behind someone else's name. The women who made things happen, but were never listed in the credits. It was the first time I felt a future again. After the meeting ended, I stayed behind. The sun was low, casting a golden glow through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looked still, but alive. My city. The one I chose. The one where I could breathe without asking permission. I leaned back in my chair, red envelope still in my desk drawer, and let that silence wash over me again. No, I didn't get justice from my family. But I got something even more enduring, clarity, and sometimes clarity outlasts justice.